Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, fire me up for this matchup. Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss heading on the road to play the Florida Gators in the Swamp. I'm going to say this, it is going to be rocking down there in Gainesville. It was rocking against LSU this week, and it's going to be even louder come next Saturday against Ole Miss. I think both of these fan bases have a ton of reason to be optimistic. I would even go as far as say Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin. That was the best football game we've seen from them against Georgia 2 weeks ago. I'd say the same exact thing for the Florida Gators under Billy Napier against LSU. Both of these teams playing some really good football. DJ Lagway, the truth, this Ole Miss defense, legit. I think this is going to be a really fun matchup from a couple of different perspectives. Now, before we get into it, as always, Florida fans, Ole Miss fans, let it fly in the comments section. A lot of different ways to look at this football game. And quite frankly, a lot of reason to be optimistic if you're both fan bases. So let it fly in the comments section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The amount of support for these preview prediction episodes means the absolute world to the boys. Dill, without further ado, I think that's where I want to start. Florida's offense, Ole Miss's defense. Let's start with this Ole Miss defense. When you talk Lane Kiffin, when you talk Ole Miss, you talk about offense. The story about this Ole Miss team in 2024, yeah, the offense has been good. This Ole Miss defense is about as legit as it gets, specifically in the front seven. Dill, I'm going to venture out and say I think this is the best front seven that we see not only in the SEC, but arguably in the country. You take a look at what they do against the run, 2.4 yards per carry allowed, number one in the country. Take a look at the pass rush, sacking the quarterback, 12% of dropbacks, number one in the country. 4 or 5 weeks ago, I would have said this is a tough matchup for Florida because Ole Miss is just going to dominate up front. Going into this game, dude, this Florida Gators offensive line is playing the best football we've seen under Billy Napier during his tenure. How do you see this matchup along the lines of scrimmage matching up here?
And that is like a combo. I think Florida's offensive line, especially in the run game, has really started to pick it
Yeah.
up. I feel like you've seen that run game come alive. And that is something, frankly, I look like Ole Miss is not an easy team to run on, but I wouldn't want Florida to give up on that necessarily early. It felt like through parts of that game against LSU, I don't think they got to it as much as they probably could have. But I think that helps slow the pass rush down. And also that's probably where you want Ole Miss. If you can get them in that game where you're being a little bit physical with them,
Yeah.
they're a very athletic, kind of smaller defensive line for the most part. I think that is something I'd lean into for Florida, but also DJ Lagway is really good working the pocket. I mean, you look at how he kind of slides and steps out of the way of things. He's done a really good job covering up for some pressure I think Florida's offensive line gives. And frankly, you look, Ole Miss has relied a lot on getting sacks and creating negative plays to really make their defense what it is. So that's always something I'm looking at. Like, again, I think DJ Lagway has just done a really good job avoiding those negatives.
What do the negative plays look like? Say a big storyline. One of the things that I think is interesting is how healthy is DJ Lagway. Even with DJ Lagway clearly not being 100%, he didn't take off and run one time against LSU. He is still really good at manipulating pockets and avoiding pressure. That is something you love about DJ Lagway, but you feel like you might need a little bit more from him against Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss has been really good dealing with quarterbacks that can create outside the pocket. They kind of do that little delayed blitz, kind of spy action with Suntarian Perkins. Suntarian Perkins is an eraser. Like, you want to try as a quarterback to get outside the pocket and extend plays. Suntarian Perkins in that run and chase situation, it doesn't get much better. I would guess Ole Miss goes to that in this matchup.
But honestly, the whole team's really fast, which I think is another thing people like. Like they like talk about the front seven. I like front seven. I think the front four might be as good as you see in all the country.
Yes.
But it's a really fast defense. I think you look at Daugherty and Paul, how fast they are, how much ground they can cover. Again, that's another thing. Florida, you've seen them do a pretty decent job with, is working that horizontal game. Ole Miss is just such a problem in terms of like how they can cover that ground. Now, obviously, the one thing they've unlocked with DJ Lagway is their ability to get it down the field. So it's not to say, like, I think with Graham Mertz, they like to really lean on that. And I still think they use it with Lagway, but that is something DJ Lagway clearly opens up for them.
Nobody throws a better deep ball right now than DJ. Like, what this kid is doing, pushing the ball vertically down the field, it straight up doesn't get any better. And if you're Ole Miss, you are trying to take that away. I think there's two things to kind of keep an eye on outside of those negative plays. One, Dill, can you take away Elijah Badger, who is clearly DJ Lagway's guy? DJ Lagway threw the football 26 times. 10 of those were going to Elijah Badger. I think, secondly, you probably do want to see Florida, kind of going back to an earlier point you made, run the football a little bit more, or at least lean on the run game more. One, I think Florida can do it. They were running the football pretty damn well against LSU. They just didn't run that many plays. You probably don't want to get into a track meet with Ole Miss, going blow for blow, because this Ole Miss team, if they touch the football enough, they're going to put points up on the board. The one concerning stat line coming out of that LSU game, and I'm not saying Florida played bad in any way, they got doubled up in time of possession, double up in plays run. Like, LSU had the football for 41 minutes. Florida had it for 18. And so if you're Florida, maybe you want to lean on that run game for two things. One, try to keep this pass rush at bay. And I think, secondly, you don't want to get into that really lopsided affair where Ole Miss is getting that many touches.
Well, because also boss physicality, I think, can be a bit of a problem for Ole Miss. Like, I just look like I don't know that their defense really wants to play that. Again, I'm not saying they can't, because they did it against Georgia.
They just did it against Georgia.
Played really well. But that's something like when they're not creating a ton of negative plays, like they weren't against Kentucky, and even a little bit like LSU, like you can do a little bit of work with this defense. Like that, to me, I just think if you drop back too often, even if you're not running the ball incredibly well, like I don't think Kentucky was necessarily running the ball incredibly well, but you can keep that defense from really like making those high impact plays against you. And then when you get your shot to hit a big one, you hit a big one. That's kind of what Kentucky did. Again, Lagway's ability to hit those big ones has fundamentally changed what this Florida ceiling is.
I'm up here saying, hey, Florida's got to run the football. It's going to be tough sledding. I mean, it's Ole Miss defense, 2.4 yards per carry allowed, number one in the country.
But you got to do it. You can't get into the situation where you're not doing it, because again, when they're teeing off on you in the pass rush, they're as good as
that's the conundrum you face when you play Ole Miss. Like, it's hard to run the football against them, but you don't want to drop back 40 times and throw the football because this pass rush is so legit. It's why this defense is one of the best units in the country. You have seen Ole Miss give up some explosive plays. Can Florida hit some of those? Going to be a big storyline. Dill, let's flip the sides. And I got kind of two big storylines. Can you continue to see the version of Ole Miss's offense that we've seen? Like, okay, Trey Harris, I think, is going to come back for this game. He's been out the last couple of weeks. Still, we've kind of said it. Without Trey Harris, this Ole Miss offense has looked as healthy as it's been all year. Like, when Trey Harris was on the football field, it seemed like they were just a little too reliant on throwing it to Trey Harris. They were a little too reliant on the vertical passing attack, and they weren't multidimensional. Without Trey Harris, they said, hey, we got a ton of other weapons we can spread it around to, and they started to do that, and that's when this Ole Miss offense really got unlocked. Trey Harris is coming back. I'm certainly not making the argument that this Ole Miss offense is worse off with Trey Harris on the football field, because he's one of the best wide receivers in the country. Can you get Trey Harris back, incorporate him into this football game, but don't lose that multi-dimensional offense that you've seen from Ole Miss the last couple of weeks, where you're getting it to all portions of the football field, you're getting some yards after the catch, you're hitting explosive plays? Can you do that? That's the storyline for Ole Miss. The storyline for the Florida Gators, can you have that defense that showed up last night against LSU? Deal 7 sacks, 11 tackles for loss against one of the best offensive lines that we see in all of the country. Caleb Banks, Tyreek Sapp, those guys took over that football game. And you look at maybe the weakest part of Ole Miss, or the part of the offense that we have the biggest question marks about, is probably the offensive line. Can Florida, at home, loud environment, hard to hear the snap count, can they take over the football game up front with that front seven? Probably the storyline that I'm looking at here.
Because that is the thing. I mean, that's what's led to me the resurgence of this Florida defense, is that front seven's legit starting to really dominate football games. Like, again, it was like the secondary, honestly, I think, has played good for the most part this year. I think they do a really good job tackling. I think Triquez Bridges playing at that corner spot, I feel like they found where he really should be playing, because he looked awesome. But you look, I think they're doing a good job in the secondary. When their defensive line really starts to play well, you see that Florida defense can be dangerous. And I thought the linebackers are starting to play well too. They're starting to make negative plays, like high impact plays. Like Shamar James has that type of capability. You got to see it consistently, because you kind of said it. At the end of the day, Ole Miss's offensive line certainly improved, but I don't look at it and say that's one of the better units on this football team. It's still probably, if anything's going to hold them back, it'd still probably be them. Again, if they can do a good job tackling these wide receivers when the ball gets out, because that has been something Ole Miss has
Also,
been.
just not giving up the explosive plays in general. Like this is still an Ole Miss offense that is when their peak offense, they're hitting explosive plays. Florida was horrible on third downs last night, but one thing they did a very good job of was not giving up the explosive plays to LSU. If you can do that against Ole Miss, we've seen that frustrate this Ole Miss offense. When they can't hit explosive plays vertically, sometimes they get out of rhythm. Can you prevent them from hitting those explosive plays? Kind of get them into that type of offense where they're clearly uncomfortable. That's kind of what you're looking at here. All right, Dill, let's get into the pick here. Ole Miss coming in on the road, 9.5-point favorites against Florida. Who you got here?
No, I think the Floridas are going to fight. I think the Gators are going to fight this one out. And I think Ole Miss, I still probably pick them to win it. But I'm just looking. The Gators aren't like quitting in games. I think they're fighting. I think, again, you look, they're just going to hit I think they're going to hit a couple big ones because, frankly, when Lagway's been around, they pretty much do it routinely every game.
Okay.
I think if they can score enough points, I look like with the way that defense is playing and how disruptive I think that front seven can be in what they're doing, confusing quarterbacks and like putting a lot of pressure on them. I think they can do a good job because Jackson Dart, when he gets like antsy, things can kind of go awry a little bit.
Florida brought pressure 42% of the time last night. They were bringing some real heat against LSU. Can almost pick some of that pressure up. That's certainly a question mark. I'm going to take Ole Miss. And as good as I think Florida looked last night, and I really do like where this Florida team's going. They're playing hard for Billy Napier. I feel like we're forgetting how good Ole Miss has been the last couple of weeks. This team, Dill, the ceiling of Ole Miss, in my opinion, is a national championship caliber football team. We've seen them hit that ceiling the last couple of weeks. Give me Ole Miss coming off the bye to go on the road and get it done against Florida. This is I'm fired up for this one. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.